This is a day in the life of a baker, part 1. I'm currently 12 weeks postpartum, and this is my first big baking day since I had a baby. I'm working on a special project, and that involved making 3 different cakes, and I wanted to make 3 different colors of batter. So I used some gel food coloring to make 3 pretty shades of pink, and then I set to work baking all of these. Side note, those pre-cut parchment liners are so key if you do a lot of baking. I had 9 cake layers to bake, but I didn't want to overcrowd my oven, so I only baked 3 to 4 at a time. And while I rotated the pans in and out, I spent some time with my best friend Spectra, then set to work making 6 batches of hybrid buttercream. Now, I absolutely love this buttercream because it is silky smooth, it's not too sweet, and it's just amazing for decorating cakes. It was seriously so much frosting. I gave it a quick stir by hand with a rubber spatula to get out any excess air, then I trimmed my cooled cake layers and popped them in the freezer for tomorrow before trying to figure out how many pounds of butter I went through today. This is a day in the life of baker, part 2. So after making roughly 8 million cake layers yesterday, today was the day to crumb coat and decorate them. And I can't even begin to explain how much rearranging I had to do in my fridge and freezer. Fitting 3 cakes in there is a lot. I literally felt like I was playing Tetris. And as the cakes cooled, I colored my frosting, then added the second layer of buttercream to each of my cakes. And we need a minute for this frosting. It is so perfectly smooth. Look at those edges. And a really easy hack for getting super smooth sides is actually running your bench scraper and your spatula under hot water, drying it off, and then letting the heat kind of like melt the buttercream as you smooth it. I do this all the time, and I absolutely swear by it. And even though stacking and frosting the cake layers isn't that exciting, I swear that takes more time than actually decorating the cake. Now for these cakes, I was going for kind of like a floral, spring, summery theme, and so the first one I did cute little rosettes all over. This one I wanted to do flowers kind of around the sides of the cake, and I added some cute little rosebuds and leaves, and I thought this was going to be my least favorite design, but I actually think it was my favorite. Now this final cake, I was kind of at a loss of how I wanted to decorate it, but I added some textured buttercream around the base and piped some cute little buttercream dollops on top. And while she was not my fave, she looked very good with all the other cakes. At this point in the day, I was absolutely exhausted, so I popped my last cake in the fridge, and then all that was left to do was pack up my leftover buttercream and clean my kitchen. And then I truly cannot end my day without compulsively checking on the cakes to make sure they're still okay in the fridge, and spoiler alert, they were. I'm sure that absolutely none of you are surprised to hear that my next addition to the millionaire family are these millionaire macarons. And let me tell you, they do not disappoint. They're made with French macaron shells, which I colored a light shade of yellow. In hindsight, I really wish I had done more of like a tan beige color, but that's a story for a different day. And the filling to these macarons is no surprise. It is a dark chocolate ganache and a thick, gooey caramel that I just love so much, and it pipes beautifully. And then of course there's a shortbread crumble on top to give it just a little bit of crunch. This is a day in the life of a baker, millionaire edition. And while baby sweets might be the sweetest thing I've ever baked, these boxes are definitely a close second. The day started with a triple batch of caramel, which kind of looks like vomit at this stage, but I promise it becomes this beautiful creamy caramel once it cools. Then I worked on a batch of Rice Krispie treats, smoothed some of that caramel onto there, topped it with, of course, chocolate ganache, added a sprinkle of sea salt, and then cut it up into 16 perfect little squares. Now, while all the treats are delicious, I'm not gonna lie, these ones are my favorite. And as an added bonus, they're also the easiest to make. Next up, I tackled the millionaire cookies by baking off some round bits of shortbread, topping them with the same caramel, and then piping on these really beautiful, I like to call them kisses of ganache. I used a large open star piping tip to make these, and they seriously are just so beautiful. Now, I told myself I needed to taste these, but I think I really just wanted a snack. They are absolutely delicious though. The last treat of the day were the millionaire macarons, and after baking the shells and playing around with how I wanted to decorate them, I decided just to add a chocolate drizzle, some shortbread crumble, and of course a little bit of gold leaf. These ended up being just too pretty not to photograph, so I took a few quick pictures, and then it was time to assemble these millionaire boxes. Now, one of these boxes is for a get together with some of my friends who are obsessed with millionaire bars, and the other is for my sister. And while I packed them pretty full, I did save myself one extra cookie because they're just too good. I couldn't end my millionaire series without making a millionaire cake, so here we are. Of course, it's made with a buttery shortbread crust that is baked to perfection so that every bite has a little bit of crunch, and that's topped with a brown butter cake batter. And now you might ask, why brown butter? And for some reason, vanilla just felt a little basic with this, and I wanted the flavor to be a little bit elevated. And then of course, it all gets topped with a thick layer of creamy caramel and decadent chocolate ganache. And millionaire bars are really all about the layers of caramel and chocolate, so I wanted them to be super thick to offset the thickness of the cake layer, and I'm happy to say I think that I achieved that. Today is my birthday, and there is no way I'd rather celebrate than with a giant slice of this death by chocolate cake. The layers bake up so tender and soft, and then to really amp up the chocolate flavor, we brush them with chocolate simple syrup, and then of course frost them with the most decadent chocolate buttercream. And while I usually love to go all out on the decoration of cakes, having a newborn has given me a new type of appreciation for a simple yet delicious cake, and that's exactly what I went for with this one. And funny story, I wanted to crumble up the cake tops to add around the cake, and it was so moist it was actually hard to crumble up with a fork. But you know, good problems to have when you're making a cake, and this is the type that will definitely have you going back for seconds. A slice of chocolate cake just isn't complete without a giant ice-cold glass of milk, and that's when the idea struck me, why not pour the milk over the slice of cake? Now, is this essentially making chocolate cake soup? Kind of. But is it the best soup I've ever tasted? Yes. It really is just so good, and the next time you have chocolate cake, I highly recommend giving it a try. This millionaire cheesecake might be my new favorite flavor. It has a buttery shortbread crust, a perfectly creamy cheesecake filling, and then is topped with a thick layer of caramel and chocolate ganache. And while all of these components together make the perfect bite, I think that the caramel is the real star of the show. It's made from scratch, but it is incredibly easy to make, and it comes together in less than 10 minutes, and that perfect consistency is what it's like at room temperature. I highly recommend giving this recipe a try. Fun fact, no pun intended, about my funfetti cake recipe is that my husband and I both love it so much, we actually used it to make our wedding cake. I think I had to make like 4 or 5 batches of it because we had to make sure everyone got a slice, but it was just as delicious then as it is now. Obviously our wedding cake didn't have sprinkle frosting, but I figured this time when I was making the recipe, why not include as many sprinkles as possible? Because honestly, you can never really have too many. This was my first time ever piping cookie dough, but it definitely won't be my last. And while scooping and rolling regular cookie dough isn't usually that big of a production, this recipe makes 140 mini chocolate chip cookies, so it really helps save a lot of time. And yes, you did hear that right, 140 mini cookies. I promise it's a very small batch recipe, it's just that the cookies themselves are so small, so you end up baking about 4 sheets of them. But they're truly the perfect bite-sized treat, and honestly, you'll be happy you have that many once you try one. I always find myself eating these by the handful, and I wouldn't have it any other way. A lot of you asked for a full video on the recipe of my Death by Chocolate cake, so here you go. The first step is to make the chocolate simple syrup, which is really just a half a cup of water and a half a cup of granulated sugar. You're going to heat that until the sugar is fully dissolved, and then you mix in a tablespoon of dark cocoa powder. And while that cools, we whisk together all the dry ingredients. This is 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 cups of granulated sugar, 3/4 of a cup of dark cocoa powder, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and a teaspoon of fine salt. Then we combine 1 cup of warm water, 1 cup of sour cream, a half a cup of vegetable oil, 2 large eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and a teaspoon of instant espresso. And I love this recipe because it really is that simple. You just pour the wet ingredients into the dry, whisk together until smooth, then pour it into your lined and greased cake pans. I'm making 3 8-inch cake layers, but you could also make 2 9-inch cake layers. While those bake at 350 degrees for 22 to 26 minutes, we work on the chocolate frosting. We mix together 2 cups of unsalted butter, 1 cup of dark baking cocoa, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a half a teaspoon of salt. Then we mix in 5 cups of powdered sugar and 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream on a low speed. And then comes the best part. We mix in 1 1/3 cups of dark chocolate that's been melted and cooled. And this is important so that it doesn't melt the butter. I like to melt it at the beginning before I make the frosting so it has a little bit of time to cool down. And then it's time for the best part, to assemble the cake. So we are brushing the cake layers with chocolate simple syrup and then spreading on an even layer of that decadent chocolate frosting. And again, to keep this just super simple and easy, we're not adding a crumb coat, we're just adding 1 thick layer of chocolate buttercream. These cake layers bake up pretty flat, but I did level them so I had some extra crumbs to decorate the cake with, but that step is totally optional. And in the world of cakes, this recipe really is about as simple and straightforward as it gets. The recipe is also linked in my bio, or you can Google Chelsey White's Death by Chocolate cake and it'll be the first thing to pop up. And if you prefer to use the metric system, I have gram measurements on my site. A lot of you seemed quite enthused about my mini chocolate chip cookies, so here is a longer form video with the full recipe. It all starts with 1 stick or a half a cup of unsalted butter. You can use salted and omit the salt if needed. Then we add in 2/3 of a cup of packed brown sugar and a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. We're going to mix this until it becomes lighter in color, and you want to make sure that you break up any bits of brown sugar that are kind of clumps. And then we mix in 1 large egg that's at room temperature and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I like to be a little bit heavy-handed when it comes to the vanilla, and we're going to mix this until the batter is smooth, then add in our dry ingredients, which include 1 1/3 cups all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, and a half a teaspoon of fine salt. And then the last step is just to fold in 1 cup of mini or chopped up chocolate chips. Normally when it comes to cookies, I say you can use any type of chip you want, but you really do want them to be mini or cut up, or else you're going to have a really hard time piping this cookie dough. And then we scoop the cookie dough into a strong piping bag. This is 18 inches. You could also use a freezer Ziploc bag if you don't have piping bag. And the goal is to pipe out cookies that are about the size of a nickel. This takes a little bit of time to get used to, but I promise by your 4th try you'll be a pro. Because yes, this recipe does make 4 trays of cookies, or about 140 cookies. Each tray gets baked in a preheated 350 degree oven for between 6 and 8 minutes, depending on whether you want your cookies to be chewier or a bit crispy. These strawberry cheesecake bars taste just like summer. They're rich, decadent, yet somehow refreshing thanks to the swirls of jammy strawberries. Now it all starts with a buttery graham cracker crust, which is baked to perfection, and when it comes to cheesecake, I really want it to be almost fluffy, if that makes sense. You know, it's going to be dense, but you want that texture to still be somehow or somewhat light, and to achieve that, I like to use an equal ratio of blocks of cream cheese to eggs, and then I also use sour cream to help lighten up that texture a bit more. And to really pack these bars with strawberry flavor, we are using a strawberry reduction to flavor half of the batter strawberry, and then we're also swirling it in on top of the bars to create these beautiful little strawberry swirls that kind of bake down to create these little pockets that are just absolutely packed with flavor. And it will take all of your patience, but you want to wait until the bars are fully chilled to cut them to get nice clean slices.